Okay, welcome everyone to this special edition of Business Strategy Series. I'm Mark Lowe. I manage the business success platform for Greater Lafayette Commerce. We're glad everyone was able to log in. I hope everyone is feeling well and staying safe. I want to take a moment to recognize our sponsors of the Business Strategy Series, Purdue Federal Credit Union, Henriot Group, and Little Engine Ventures for helping us get the business success strategies or business strategy series up and running. Last June, Sam Burns from Purdue Federal Credit Union came to Andrew and myself to talk about developing a series that helped business owners hit certain milestones in their business in order to be successful. Since June of last year, we've talked about developing different strategies using the 4 decisions with Patrick, who will be with us today. And then we've talked about how to manage the sales pipeline with Mark Brandyberry. We had an event on how to manage cash flow, and we had Huth Thompson there and Sam Burns to talk about those things. And on April 28th, we'll be presenting how to get better at people with Chad Brown, an HR consultant and owner of Profile. So in our special edition today, we want to be sure to encourage you to communicate when Patrick pauses and asks for questions. He wants that feedback, wants those questions, wants you to interact so that we can learn more and get the most out of what we do today. So today we'll be talking about the playbook for success of building your game plan for winning the war on COVID-19. And with that, we'd like to welcome Executive Coach Patrick Frazier to come and speak to us. Patrick?
Well, good morning. I'm Patrick Frazier, the owner of the Coaching Authority located here in Northern Indiana, and I am excited to share with you a little bit about a playbook for success or building our game plan for winning the war on COVID. So just without a lot of introduction, there's a nice Photoshop picture of me. These photos always look better than in person. Some say I have a face for radio, but maybe it's just a face for webinars today. But I'm excited to be here. As a coach, I'd remind you that coach is someone that tells you what you don't want to hear. Maybe someone who sees what you don't see so that you can be the leader or the person or the family member that you've always known you could be. And I love that description of a coach, and I claim that as a title. I prefer coach over consultant or teacher or facilitator because I really believe that I exist to help others become all that they're called to be. So today we're going to talk a little bit about building our game plan for winning the war on COVID. And I thought, it would be great if we could start our time together with just kind of talking about some of the good news that's out there. We hear so much of the bad news and the negativity. I tend to be an optimistic and positive person by nature. So I like to start my meetings and webinars and presentations with the good news. So more than 500,000 people have already recovered from the virus. We hear the downside of over 2 million that have contracted the virus and the continuing escalating number of deaths and acute cases, but over 500,000 people have already recovered. WHO has tells us that there's more than 20 vaccines in development in various stages of approval and testing. Air pollution continues to decline, plummets in cities where there's high rates of quarantine. Nobody's out on the road and factories aren't open. So the air is cleaner for us all. We hear almost daily about athletes and and celebrities that are pledging to pay the wages of workers and support staff and facility staff, and just people helping others um, financially and in many other ways. School districts, kids all over the nation are excited because summer vacation began in March. Well, the downside of that is that for many families, um, that was the one meal that they could count on. So you're hearing now the good news that school districts across the country are staying open, keeping their doors open for serving meals to kids and families. Communities and countries opening up new lanes of free entertainment almost every day. A couple times a day, you hear of free concerts and free things where artists are making their trade or their craft available at no charge to a community that's suffering. Some of my favorites are just hearing about people out on the balconies of, of their apartments or flats in Italy and doing concerts or solos, or even just things like at 7 o'clock every night, people going out, banging on pots and pans and yelling and praising just the first responders and healthcare workers, encouraging those. No matter where you look, people are being kind to one another, it seems, these days. While it's a terrible time for us all, we really see some of the good things in humanity coming out. And I'm drawn to a quote from Fred Rogers that I really love at this time. It says, when I was a boy, I would see scary things in the news, and my mother would say to me, look for the helpers. You'll always find people who are helping. And I think that's the good news about what's going on right now, is seeing the generosity of humanity and some of the good things in humanity starting to bloom right before our eyes. I was on a call just this morning, a 7:30 call with 15 business leaders, and we were just doing a quick check-in. And one of my business leaders, actually a good close friend, said, it's really brought our family closer together. It used to be that when we were at home together, everybody was on their cellular devices and off in separate places, and we really didn't interact much. But now we're together 24/7. We're playing games together. We're doing walks together. We're kicking the soccer ball around in the backyard as a family, and it's really brought our family back together. And I'm so thankful for this time. I thought it was an interesting comment, but I think it kind of reflects some of the good news that's amidst us all now. I wanted to start our time today with good news, but then kind of share with you something that I think is very relevant in our times. Perhaps you've heard of the Stockdale principle. Admiral Stockdale's story is narrated in Jim Collins' book, Good to Great. And he talks about Stockdale's experience in the Hanoi Hilton, where he was held in captivity for 7 years. He was brutally tortured for over 20 times, and along with many others. And many during that time perished, and they were unable to prevail. And in the book, Collins was interviewing Stockdale, and he said, how did you do it? How did you make it? And he says, well, I was an optimist. And so that seemed to make sense to Jim. And he said, yeah, and it was also face the brutal facts. And it seems counterintuitive, it seemed that how could you be an optimist? How could you be a pessimist about it? And he says, well, it's simple. You really have to balance this faith and hope. You can never lose faith or hope, but you also have to balance that with what are the brutal facts of your current reality. And he talks about this balance of optimism and pessimism, and a balance of, you know, hope and faith, and facing the brutal facts. And that's how he was able to get through it. And I think that's important for us right now. We're in the middle of a crisis that has created quite a stir and conflict, and a lot of negative things, but it's also created some opportunities. And we're going to kind of talk a little bit about facing the brutal facts, but also having faith and hope that we're going to get through this. And when we do, it's going to be a brave, bold new world for all of us. This is a diagram. I was on a call about 2 weeks ago with a very good friend of mine, and we were kind of sharing some white space, and he drew this diagram. And I thought, gee, that's really good. And you can see for today, I spared no expense in creating flashy graphics for everyone on the call, but it's just too good to pass up. And I just kind of wanted to share. He says, you know, in times of economic downturn or crisis, he says it always follows a pattern. He says, you know, there's a descent, some slow, some sharp. There's a period where you bottom out, and then there's this ascent or return to where you were. And for some downturns, it's a sharp V. For other downturns, it's more of a U shape, and it's more flattened at the bottom. He says, but they always follow the same pattern. And he says it's important to know that you're where you're at right now. While many of us want to believe we're at the bottom point of this, conventional wisdom at the time is that we're really still in the descent. As much as we want to be at the bottom, or even think that we're starting to climb out of this, we may very well still be at the descent. But what I think is interesting about this particular diagram is really two things. The brutal facts are the economic downturn is almost always twice as deep as we think it is going to be. The second brutal fact is that the recovery downturns almost always take twice as long as we think it is. We want to think that the recovery is going to be a sharp V. We're going to be at the bottom and quickly rebound, and it's going to be a 45-degree angle back up. But in actuality, it's more like a 30-degree angle, a slow rise. So if you face the brutal facts that the downturn is going to be deeper than you think and the recovery is going to take longer, if those are the brutal facts, then the question becomes, what's your next move? And that's what we want to talk about today. We'll talk about what our next move is, what's our strategy, what's our tactical game points. I thought leading into this is kind of just a recognition of where we're at today in the crisis. For many of us, that began on or around March 16th when Governor Holcomb issued a guideline that required restaurants and bars and non-essential businesses basically board up their lobbies, and everything had to be takeout. You know, for me and my wife, that was a huge deal, because a lot of our entertainment at this season in life was eating out and being with friends and being in restaurants and things like that. So, you know, immediately we were thrust out of our comfort zone and into a zone where, it was a little fearful, right? And many of you probably remember the stark difference between Friday, March 13th, you know, Lafayette was bustling and traffic in downtown. You couldn't find a parking space. And then on the 16th, it was like a ghost town, right? Parking wasn't a problem, and there wasn't anybody on the streets, and it was really surreal. But it kind of struck us into this zone of fear, and we were trying to gobble up as much information as we could, and we were affected by the opinions of many. And then on the 23rd, of course, Holcomb, basically shut everything down. And, we're at stay at home, and we've been at stay at home for a couple of weeks now. Well, moving out of the fear zone, then we started to say, okay, this is real. What do we learn? What can we learn about the virus? What can we learn about skills for running virtual meetings? And many of us got familiar with running Zoom meetings and Skype and FaceTime and Google Hangouts. And we started to deal with some of the challenges and problems in a new way. And we started to get a little more comfortable. My hope and for all of us on the call and each of my clients is that we move out into this growth zone as quickly as we can. We start to set new goals, that we say, what are the barriers? What are the objectives? What are our dreams? And how do we get on with life, right? With this new set of rules. This slide is really important, I think, to building our game plan for success, because it really talks about being real with ourselves. Where are we today, and what do we need to do to kind of move into that learning and growth zone so that we can get about building our businesses. It's interesting, the words that we use kind of affect our mindset. Are we still in this failure or fear mindset? Are we in a mindset of frustration? Are we in a mindset of success? And are we transforming into this this new mindset of growth and inspiration? It's interesting, if you want to change your mindset, change your words that you use. This is really powerful when we look at building a game plan for winning the war on COVID, or winning the war on any crisis that we may face. Some would say this is 100-year unprecedented type of crisis that we're facing. Many of us would hope that we would never have to face another crisis like this. For those of us that remember 2008, that was a crisis. Many of us can remember the 9/11 crisis. Crises will come. There'll be other crises. We need to be really, really good at figuring out how to change our mindset, change our words, change our mindset, so that we can transform to whatever that new normal might be. It's those that adapt and have learned to adapt quickly and adapt well that will survive this crisis and future crises that we might face. So you want to change your mindset, change your words. Look at the words that we're using with our employees, with words that we're using with our families, words that we're using in self-talk. What are the words that we're using? Change those words, build a game plan for succeeding. So let's kind of talk a little bit about strategy, and then we'll spend most of our time today talking about the tactical game plan. So from a strategic perspective, we like to look at what we call a DOTSI model, DOTSI. And DOTSI is an acronym for demand, oxygen, team, supply chain, and innovation. Let's talk just a moment about that from a strategic perspective. When we talk about demand, we say, what can we do to generate demand for whatever product or service that we provide, or how can we create demand for something that we have a core competency or skill set, or the product or material, in order to solve any type of customer issue or problem that we might have. What can we change, or what do we need to change in order to stimulate demand to drive a business to our company? Oxygen, in business terms, cash is oxygen. We've heard cash is king. I even heard on a call last week from where 80 coaches all across the world get together once a week. We kind of talk about what's going on in our corner of the planet. And one of my colleagues said, cash is not king, cash is God right now. So to some extent, we need to hoard cash, right? And we're going to talk a little bit about some tactical things that we can do to do that. But what actions do we need to take right now to ensure that we have plenty of cash, plenty of liquidity in order to sustain this phase of the crisis, right? So to some extent, this is a game of survival where we'll get to the other side of that, and it, must be present to win, right? So it's the last man standing sort of thing. So what do we got to do to preserve cash? Team, how's the health and capacity of our team? Are people staying healthy, mentally, physically, in all ways, right? We want people to be at fighting weight when we get through to the other side. And we want people to be involved in and engaged in the activities that we need to survive through this phase. Supply chain, how's our suppliers doing? We're only as good as the weakest link in our supply chain, they say. So are suppliers weathering the storm? Are they able to provide the product that we need in order to make it through this phase? And then innovation. This is a time for innovating. What's the new normal? Where are we now? Where do we see the market moving? What are the new opportunities that are not present? This is a time for us really to shine. It's said that we're a nation of entrepreneurs, a nation of creative, innovative business leaders. Well, now's the time for us to rise up and show that. We'll talk about in a little bit here about all the new opportunities. There are at least 125 new opportunities that are present in the world today, or in the nation today, just because of the coronavirus, right? So how can we take advantage of that? What are the opportunities around those businesses or industries or business models that are actually thriving as a result of innovation and creativity of business owners like yourselves? So the DOTSI is a good way to or a good framework for kind of framing up your strategy for our game plan. So I want to spend our time now just kind of walking through our game plan, a 10-point tactical game plan. We'll talk about our staff. We'll talk about assessing the impact, our battlefield. We'll talk about accountability for gathering and tracking for financial aid. Every game plan has a good defense, a good offense. We'll have specific actions that you can take, the importance of communicating, the importance of strong leadership in times of chaos and crisis. We'll talk a little bit about looking inward and taking care of yourself, putting your oxygen mask on first, and then how using a coach, a mentor, advisor is helpful to getting executing a solid game plan. So let's dive into a couple. First thing we want to make sure is protect your staff. Whatever it is, whatever business that you're in, it's about people. One of my favorite quotes, work would be great if it weren't for the people. Well, guess what? Every business that we're in is a people business, right? So the first thing that we have to look at is we have to make sure that the people in our workplace are safe, they're healthy, right? And we want to implement the World Health Organization workplace guidelines for the office, right? Things like social distancing and masking and making sure that people are healthy upon arrival into work, and quarantining those that are sick, and those guidelines. Also implementing remote work procedures. Most of us have done that. We've learned how to use Zoom and Skype and FaceTime and Google Hangouts, and we've learned how to use whiteboards and murals and collaborative workspace, and we're still learning all of that, right? I suspect that that will be an element of what the new workplace will be like when we get to the other side of this. We'll be more comfortable using those tools, and we'll open up a whole lot more opportunities. We also take a look at travel restrictions. Obviously, some are mandated restrictions, but what are the travel restrictions that we have for people within the company? Certainly internationally, nationally, but also interstate, even between one facility and another. You know, what are the restrictions coming in and out of our plants? How do we communicate with one another? How do we hold one another accountable? That's a big thing. You know, we're talking with one of my clients about accountability in a virtual workplace, which is you know, holding people accountable, and it comes back to the same principles of clarifying what their priorities are, clarifying what the metrics are, and having a solid communication rhythm to create a culture of accountability. Continuity planning. You know, looking at what do you do if one of your workers is tested positive? How does somebody else in your workforce complete those essential tasks? What do you do if you've got an entire team or group of workers that has to be quarantined? What do you do if you have an entire shift? Or for some of us, what do you do if you have an entire plant? What are your succession plans? What are your plans for maintaining and sustaining business to at least an essential level? So there's a lot of things that we need to look at, but number one in our game plan is, what are we doing to protect our staff? How do we protect the people that matter most at our workplace? A great resource, Everybody Matters by Bob Chapman. If you haven't read that, he's a great author. He's a very entertaining speaker if you ever get to hear Bob speak, but a lot of the principles that we're talking about in the time of crisis about protecting your staff is just everyday business from Bob Chapman's work in Everybody Matters. Number two, we want to look at the battlefield. We want to assess the impact, right? The very first thing that we advise businesses to do is do a cash flow projection. You know, pull your financial advisor, your CPA together and do a 15, 30, 45. What that means is, what does your business look like if you've got a 15% reduction in sales? What do you got to do in order to break even? What about a 30% reduction? What's break even, a budget look like for that? What's a 45% reduction in sales? What does that look like? So we recommend that people take a look at the battlefield. What are the brutal facts if revenue is dropped by 15, 30, 45? And then for extra credit, what if your business 100% reduction in sales, right? And there are actually some businesses, sadly, that have seen that. But some businesses close, but other businesses pull the collective intelligence of their staff together and they say, okay, we have these resources, human resources, inventory, capital. How can we repurpose that? You see and hear stories that are repurposing, you know, their business. Every dollar that they made 45 days ago is not there anymore. So all the new money that they're making it through reinventing their business or redefining or repurposing their business at 100% reduction in old sales and generating new sales revenue. But the bare minimum would be take a look at a cash flow projection for 15, 30, 45% reduction in sales. What's the break even look like, and have that ready. Secondly, what does the recovery curve look like? the recovery curve that I had up on the slide a couple slides previously, is a nice U-shaped curve. But what's your curve look like, right? And what's it look like for your industry? What's it look like for your geography, the area that you serve? What does it look like for your business, right? We all have our own curves, um, but what does that curve look like for you? And what are the brutal facts around that curve? And really understanding what your curve looks like. We want to look at liquidity. As I mentioned earlier, the name of the game right now is about liquidity and having cash to survive. 45 days, 60 days ago, it was about liquidity so that we could reinvest and grow. For some of us, we're still looking at that. But for most of us, unfortunately, it's about liquidity to survive, to kind of make it through this phase of the crisis so that we can be present when the economy opens back up. So there's different models for looking at that, but either way you look at it, you got to look at your balance sheet to maintain liquidity during this phase. Understand the flow of your business. They say the smartest business owners are those that really understand the flow of their business. What's the cash in and the cash out of your business? I can't stress that enough. If you don't understand it well enough, then it's a really good time to have a financial advisor, a CPA, or an accountant to come alongside you and really help you understand the ins and outs of your business. Get a thorough understanding of your cash position and your reserves. Know your cash balances for your checking, your savings, your line of credit, and what credit availability you have. It's a really good time to stay connected with your banker. We'll talk about this in a little bit here, but it's a good time to talk to your banker. They may know of other sources of cash that are available to you and your business. You should have a really good connection with your banker anyway, but right now it's even more amplified, the importance of having a good relationship with your banker. So assess the battlefield, take a look at the impact, where you're at now, and what's it look like, the recovery curve. A great resource in this area, Simple Numbers, Big Profits by Greg Crabtree, right? Greg he's a recovering CPA is what we like to say, but Greg is a good friend, and he's got done a really good job of taking all the financial stuff and making it easy to understand for all the rest of us mere mortals. And so highly recommend his work, Simple Numbers, Big Profits. Once again, our best leaders in business are the ones that really understand the ins and outs of your business, the cash ins and outs of your business. So know your battlefield, assess the impact, know where you're at. That would be the second point as we kind of move into the next. So with that, I've covered quite a bit of material, and I just kind of want to check in with Mark to see if there's anything in the chat box. And then I kind of want to give you a minute or two just to kind of pause and reflect. What's that one thing that you could do to better understand the current battlefield and better prepare for the journey ahead? So just a minute or two, a quiet time, think time, and we'll check the chat box and see if there's anything out there. All right? Mark, are you still on?
Yep, I'll let you know if someone sends in a question. Just you can use the chat box or the Q&A box. Okay.
All right, shall we continue?
Yep, we have something for you. What
Okay,
are
what do you
some of
got?
the things that people often miss as far as looking for liquidity?
Oh, that's a great question. You know what? If you'll just bear with me, I've got a couple of slides that I think I can help you with that. And if your question isn't answered, please repost it in. I'm going to have another slide that looks almost like this, but I think I can help you out. I got um, a whole bunch of good stuff here in the playbook.
Okay, I think we're ready then.
All right, let's roll. All right. So financial accountability. Here's the point I want to make um, here is that have a single point of contact, somebody that's accountable in your organization to gather, track, and help employees and the company get financial aid, right? So one single point of contact. When I was worked for Citigroup and had an organization about 200, 250 employees, I had my mentor was an executive vice president at that time, and he taught me something that was really important about accountability. And he says, Pat, you want to have one hand to shake and one throat to choke, right? So you want to have a single point of contact, right, for keeping track of that. Now, kind of graphic the way that he presented it, but it really made it a point that be very, very clear on a single point of contact and be very clear on what the accountabilities are. We need somebody in the organization that's going to track all the COVID related expenses. We want to have somebody that's responsible for really understanding the laws, regulations, and what financial aid is available. We want to make sure also at this point, though, that we, as we mentioned, keeping good contact with the banks, making sure that we understand what the new laws and the new fundings available through the government, right? The SBA loans, unemployment. What are the laws and guidelines for unemployment and furloughing and releasing people as necessary, bringing people back. I think the very best advice that I got in this area was from Ron Lovett, and in his book, he's got a book, Outrageous Empowerment, but specifically about COVID, is that set up a COVID-19 expense line. In other words, tag any expense that you have with COVID-19. That way, when we get through the other side, we can tally up the expenses. There may be financial aid, there may be credits, there may be something that's available. Or when you're looking at having obviously forgivable loans and that sort of thing, you'll be able to look at all the COVID related expenses quickly without having to gather notes and scraps and try to remember what we did back in April of 2020. So set up a COVID-19 expense line so that we can track that. And then probably the most important is have a single point of contact for financial aid for the company and employees. So every great game plan has a defense strategy. As I mentioned earlier, some would say this is a game where, must be present to win. We got to get to the other side. We got to make sure that we're healthy and we're wiser to the fact. And when the economy starts to rebound, we want to have a solid place in the new economy. So there's some of the things that we were talking about maintaining liquidity, but manage cash daily. For some of us, we may look at our cash position on a monthly basis or maybe even a weekly basis. But during these times, we want to make sure that we manage cash daily. Proactively manage accounts receivable, customers that owe us money. We've already done the work. We billed them for it. You may need to call them and ask for payments. You may need to offer some terms, but the key here is to get as much of it in your bank account, keep it longer. And one of our programs that Mark and I have been running through the chamber, we talk about the cash conversion cycle. Really, we want to shorten that cycle, get as much of the cash that we can into our bank account sooner and hold it longer. We can talk about that at a later date. Dig into your recurring expenses, right? These seem to creep into our P&L in good times. You know, everything from unused subscriptions, office maintenance, laundry service, bottled water, you know, hoarding office supplies. We order supplies and we don't quite need them. We just know that it's that time of the year or month that we order them. You know, dig into these recurring expenses. I can't stress this enough. They just kind of creep in and then we never unplug them, right? But we don't use them. Now is a good time to dig in. You'll be amazed at what you find. You know, there's frugal people in your organization that this just comes naturally to them, right? So it's time to get them into the game, right? Have them tell us what's, you know, what's wasteful, right? Wage a war on waste. And a lot of that waste is in our recurring expenses. Move from auto payments to manual. This is a big one. If you're paying suppliers or vendors, paying people automatically, credit card payments, right? Just putting it on our credit cards. Move to something that's manually. In other words, you actually somebody high up in the organization is actually the one that's pressing the key to say, pay this vendor this much on this date, right? It's convenient when business is, you know, money is flowing in and flowing out. But once again, we want to manage our cash daily, and we want to make sure that we know the ins and the outs, and move from auto to manual, and you'll start to see and get a sense of what things that can be cut from your budget. Review non-essential discretionary spending and eliminate things you can absolutely live without. Stretch terms with suppliers. You know, this is always a controversial one because we're afraid, look, if I try to stretch terms with suppliers, they'll cut me off, and I can't have them, I can't deal with that right now when I'm dealing with all the other stuff. But the reality is that if you advise them that this is a temporary measure and you'll return to standard terms when this storm passes, we're finding that people get it. They understand that, right? And they actually want to keep you as a client. So work with your suppliers. They'll grumble a little bit, but they won't cut their noses off to spite their own face. Is the lesson that we're learning. They're partners, and we need to work together. So one more draconian measure is move cash from checking to savings so that, you know, it's less accessible. Sometimes, you know, in business, if it's in our checking account, we just pay that, right? So move it into your savings account, and then move it from your savings account into your checking account when you need it, right? And it may seem like a shell game, but it's just another layer that allows you to kind of really hold on to the cash and make sure that you're using it the right way at the right time for the right reasons, right? Inventory, you know, inventory on your shelf is like cash, right? And so if you can lighten your inventory load, that's a good thing. Restock in smaller quantities. Maybe you're seeing, for example, that your customers are buying less, right? So if they're buying less, maybe you need to have less inventory on your shelf. You need to look at your inventory levels, reset your your inventory levels. Look at your purchasing practices. Are they out of sync with the lower business levels, right? And you just don't want a lot of your cash tied up in inventory right now. People, this is never a fun one to talk about, but cut your C players, right? Cut the players that are in foul trouble, right? These are attendance issues, behavior, performance, or whatever. The reality is that we talk about this in our seminar series that you got to manage the people. You got to have a people strategy. You got to do people assessment regularly, and you got to take care of the people once again, because people are the heart and soul of our business. But we're not very good. If we're honest with ourselves, we're not very good at having those difficult conversations, or having those conversations with the C players. Well, we're in unprecedented times, challenging times. We need all hands on deck. We don't need any drag on the system. If they're a C player, now would be the time to cut them. So I call them, cut the ones in foul trouble, right? I'm a huge basketball player. I mean, if you're in foul trouble, it's tough times, but we need A and B players. So the second part of the strategy for defense is have a plan for that second round of cuts, right? If you had to. And this really goes back to the 15, 30, 45, drop in revenue, what do you got to do to break even? A lot of your costs are tied up in labor. So you got to make sure that every labor dollar is returning, tenfold, right? So we got to make sure we get a good return on our labor. So, after you cut those in foul trouble, then what's that second round of cuts, right? But here's the asterisk in this. We want to make sure that we protect those players on the roster that have these core competencies, right? These difficult to acquire skills. We don't want to cut so deep, cut through the bone, right? But we want to be prepared to make those cuts. And here's the thing: if you think it through now, right, then if you have to execute it, you'll feel better about executing a plan rather than saying, "Oh my gosh, I can't make payroll this month or this week," right? So I got to cut a bunch of people. So just go down the hall and cut every other person, sort of thing, right? So think it through, have a strategy. Your first round of cuts are those that are on, in foul trouble. Second round of cuts that you got to make, and then just make sure that you're not cutting so deep, cutting into the bone, that you're cutting these core competencies or difficult to acquire skill sets. So the people part of it is a big part of your defense, because a lot of our cash is tied up in our labor, right? So we absolutely have to get that part of it right. Okay. So leadership, just kind of close up on defense. We need strong leadership right now, that we focus on the short term. We got to get through this season. We got to focus on midterm goals, right? We can't lose sight of our long term, but it's really time for us to dial it in a little closer. CEOs, business owners that I'm talking to right now, a lot of times are just saying, you know what, I'm just trying to get to Friday, right? I'm just trying to get to the end of the week. And people will say, well, what's the plan for next week? And they say, I don't know, I'll tell you on Monday, right? And I think that's kind of the state of things. We got to, focus on getting through today, solve the problem today. We get to live to tomorrow. Like if you've watched, the show Mission to Mars, right? You just got to solve the problem in front of you, and you get to live till tomorrow. And that's kind of the state of things right now. And then we kind of need to look a little farther term, the week, the month, where do we go from here? And then as the economy springs back, not losing sight of our long-term goals, but calibrating those as needed. So good balance of leadership between short and midterm goals is what people need right now. In times of chaos, people need leaders. People need structure. They need clarity where there's lack of clarity. And this is a call for all the leaders on the call to provide that clarity, provide that focus, and to help people just focus, align, and execute on what's in front of them. So with that, just kind of pause before we dive into offense, but maybe there were some ideas in the defense section that would allow you to create some liquidity in cash, hopefully. But I want to check the chat box, but I also want to see if just give you a moment just to pause and reflect. What's one area that you can tighten up on your defense, right? That would increase your chance of survival. All right, Mark, I'll turn it to you to see if there's anything in the chat box, and we'll take a minute or two to reflect, and then we'll jump right into offense.
Sure. Mark Brandyberry posted, said, some of those wasteful items are less wasteful than one might believe. I worked for a company in 2008 that demanded that people bring their own Kleenex and toilet paper. And he says, really? He says, when VPs were getting paid six figures, this was highly resentful. Employees talked about that for 5 or 6 years later. It saved a tiny amount of money and cost a morale in a big way. It was an indication that something more was wrong, and they were right.
That's a great perspective.
Yeah.
And I think that's a leader's challenge is, what's the right thing to do at the right time for the right reasons, right? To get the right results. We just want to make sure that everybody gets through this crisis healthy, safe. We want to get to the other side of this and continue to thrive, right? And bringing your own toilet paper and Kleenexes, that might bring some other elements into into the situation that we may not want to deal with. But I think it's the leaders' challenges is what's the right thing to do at the right time for the right reasons, right? So that we get the right results.
Sure.
Good point. Thank you.
And if anyone has an answer to the question, what one area could you tighten up in your defense to increase your chance of survival, you can put it in the Q&A or chat, and I'll read it off to Patrick.
And while we're taking it, what I hear from my networks, the number one thing obviously is the people, right? Because so much of our business, our costs is in people. We just got to get the people stuff right. But the other one that just keeps coming up is just the recurring expenses. How many recurring expenses, subscriptions that we sign up for that we're not using, that we don't really need, right? And they just it's kind of like the hallway closet, right? We all have a hallway closet, right? That we clean it out in the spring, and then by the end of the year, it's got all kinds of stuff in it, right? Stuff that we didn't know that we had, right? Or we couldn't find anymore, right? So just look at those recurring expenses, and we don't need to cut everything, right? But maybe the maybe during these times, maybe we can live without that. So anyway, I hear an awful lot about that. Just finding people that had subscriptions to magazines that nobody were looking at, or they had subscriptions for recurring expenses that were showing up that they didn't know what they were, right? And they were overpaying for services. And so just take a look at it. Just take a healthy look at it. And I think you'll be amazed at what you find.
Jennifer says, don't forget to furlough some of those payments that can be extended, like auto loans, insurance, equipment loans, that can buy you time right now.
Oh, that's thank you, Jennifer. Yeah. Good.
Okay.
All right. We'll move on then and move into offense, my favorite. I'm always, as I mentioned, I'm a big basketball fan. So, um, you know, March Madness this year was March Sadness because we didn't have, games that I could go to. But I've always been a kind of guy that, likes, I'm an optimist. I like offense. I like putting more points on the board. And this is kind of my favorite section of the webinar. So I think the key here is a couple things I kind of wanted to share with you. Just think about pivoting to um, reinventing, innovation, creation, get people together and start talking about what are our customers dealing with? What are the pain points? What are the problems that this crisis has thrust them into? And how can we bear the collective intelligence of our organization onto that so that we can solve that and make ourselves useful during this time? How can we add value? What if, right? You're finding that um, um, regulations that were once obstacles are no longer barriers. You're finding that um, um, new opportunities that are out there, new ways to solve old problems. It's really, really exciting, I think. Anyway, take a look at your core competencies. What are the strengths of your organizations? What are the systems and processes and people that you do really, really good right now? And what are the things that you suck at, right? And just being brutally honest with the things that you're not good at and what are the things that you're really good at. If you're really good at something, right, then um, um, uh, you may have to use that core competency or leverage that core competency in a different way than what you were 45 days ago, right? You kind of think, um, I was trying to, BIC, right? When we think of BIC, a lot of times we think of lighters and cheap pens, right? Well, BIC's core competency was really they could make, they were really good at making things with plastic and metal, right? So that allowed them they started making BIC pens and, well, plastic and metal, and it turns out lighters and all kinds of things that they could make, right? So going back to what your company's core competencies are, what are those strengths, right, and abilities, and then how could those be leveraged into um, into other areas. Um, your mindset, we talked about in one of the slides earlier, the words we use changes our mindset, but rather than what was it, the good old days, and it was great back then, to pivoting to a mindset to say, what will it be? What what will the new world be like? What will our place be? What can we contribute, right? So pivoting to a transformative mindset is important. What are some of the new strategies that we might be able to use? One of my favorite authors in this space is Callahan Krippendorf. He's got a book out there. It's been out there for a couple of years called Outthink the Competition, and he's got 36 stratagems, 36 different strategies or different ways to look at things, right? That we might be able to use in this new world, right? You might we'll talk a little bit about this in a moment, but target the essential, critical infrastructure workers. There's 16 industries out there that are critical to our infrastructure. They're still open for business, and many of them are hiring, growing, and still need things. So what can our business do to provide value or service to them? We'll talk about the Sweet 16 in a minute. leverage banking relationships. What outside cash and assistance are available? Again, it's a great time to, have have your friendly banker uh, on a phone call or a Zoom call, so that they know things and what's available that you may not be aware of. Um, there is assistance available, and you're hearing some great stories about um, how that assistance is a lifeline for people, and it's also an inspiration, and they're um, continuing to operate and serve and even grow and expand because of that. There's a great video out there. Simon Sinek, I'm a big fan of his, and he recently released a book, The Infinite Game. But he's got a short video out there, if you Google it, on unprecedented times, where it's just raw footage of him talking with his team, right? And how he talks about these are not unprecedented times. We've been here before. We've done that. It's just different. And but it's not unprecedented, and we'll probably have other crises too. And how we do it, it's really encouraging. Encourage you to Google it and watch a 5-minute raw footage of him talking with his team. And then wash, rinse, repeat. Draw the creatives together, leverage the collective intelligence, look at your core competencies. How can they serve a pain point in the market, and keep our mindset focused forward, and just like it says on the bottle of shampoo, wash, rinse, repeat, and we'll get through this. So a key part of our game plan for winning this is having a solid defense, right? Must be present to win, and then putting some points on the board offensively. What if every dollar that your business earns 60 days from now is not the same way that you earned a dollar 60 days ago, right? It's kind of scary to think that, but it's also kind of liberating to kind of think what we might do. So good offense, a couple of areas that I think are really interesting that we should talk about are getting offensive on our margin and our customers. Let me expand on that a little bit. For our margin, what's the difference between the revenue and the expenses, right? So how can we reduce our expenses and still generate premium dollars for whatever product or service? Are we being more efficient or less efficient in the time of virtual, right? I have a client here in South Bend that provides calculations for the finance industry for mortgage loans and auto loans. And as you might expect, they were fully prepared to go virtual. And I was on a call with them yesterday, and I said, well, how's productivity? And they said, all the metrics that we have would say that productivity has actually increased by 25 to 40%. And I thought that was interesting. And so I dug a little deeper and said, well, why is that? Why are you more efficient? Why are you more productive? And he said, well, because over virtually, we're having more meetings that are shorter, but they're crisp, and we bring absolute clarity on what everybody needs to do between now and the next meeting. And I thought, And I said, so what are you going to do when we get to the other side? And he said, we're probably still going to have more meetings and shorter, because we really like the productivity gains and the efficiency that we have over this. So anyway, what can you do to work on your efficiency in your business? You can create more margin by negotiating better supplier prices. We talked a little bit about that. You can drop unprofitable products. We talked a little bit about letting the C players, or the players that are in foul trouble, go. What about clients that you have right now? We probably, it's probably safe to say that we all have those clients that are not as profitable as others. They just tend to take more time and attention Um, and, I don't like this term, but I'll use it. Have you ever fired a client? Right? Have you ever released a client or put a client on furlough? Maybe it's time to do that, right? If they're not profitable or they're not within our core customer, right? They may be using very precious resources we need for our very profitable customers or resources that we need to develop our very profitable products going forward. Start looking at bundling products and bundling services and create more margin. That's important in offense because our margin, our profit margin creates or contributes to our liquidity, and our liquidity is related to our ability to sustain this phase of the crisis. And our liquidity is important when we get to the other side of the crisis for us to um, reinvest in the business and grow and scale the business, which is really what we want to do. We're not in this just to simply survive. Our game plan is to survive and thrive, to continue to scale up and grow our businesses. So margin is important for liquidity, which contributes to our ability to survive and thrive in the future. On offense, we look at our customers. Perhaps you have the liquidity to acquire a collapsing competitor. Not every business is going to make it through this. Some are going to perish in the descent. Some will perish when we're in the valley. Some will perish while they begin to ascend. They won't have the liquidity to make it through. While that's sad for small businesses, it's the very real truth. And if we're in a position, and if you've prepared for this, some of my clients are already talking about competitors that they're making a play to acquire during this, right? And which will allow them to expand their territory. It'll allow them to expand and accelerate their growth plans. So acquiring a collapsing competitor is something that needs to be thought through. Solving new customer problems. It's a good time for us to earn some sweat equity with our customers, right? It's a good time for us to build trust if we can solve problems in unique ways. Spending time on meeting their needs. Maybe we can buy customer contracts from our competitors. Maybe they're not going out of business, but maybe they don't have the ability to fulfill all their contracts that they once had. Perhaps we're in a position to do that. So let's put some points on the board. What are your opportunities for growth? How can you, what are some of the opportunities to create margin? What are some of our opportunities to build some sweat equity with our customers? And the thought there would be to pull your teams together and just brainstorm in these two areas, and then come up with a couple of actionable things that you could do in the next week to 7 to 30 days out. As I mentioned, the Sweet 16, there's 16 essential critical infrastructure workers that are open for business, and many of them are hiring, many are expanding, many of them still need products and services that the rest of us can provide. One idea is to just step through this. I call it the Sweet 16, right? Once again, in basketball terms, but 16 essential industries. Step through each industry and say, how could our business help or assist or aid this particular industry, and brainstorm those. What you may find is that your sale process moves quicker or is accelerated with these 16. You may find that working with companies that are serving industries outside of these 16, that your sales process is slower or non-existent in terms of business development. So put your sales team and marketing team together and talk through how can we provide product or service to the Sweet 16. and then develop some actionable steps there. You may find that you go farther faster, they would say. I was on a call a week ago today, and one of the presenters presented 125 different product and service growth opportunities, right? Things that weren't there 45 days ago are now possibilities and growth opportunities just as a result of COVID-19. The link there on the screen, you may want to copy that down because 125 is a week ago and they're adding to that daily. Products and services that are just growing. I talked to Mark briefly yesterday, and he and I were talking. I said, "Hey, Mark, I was looking at this list of products and services, and one of the things on there was pizza delivery. Go figure. Yeah, food delivery is a big one. Another one was board games. Yeah, people are stuck at home, and what do you want to do? They're tired of putting together the 50-piece jigsaw puzzle, and they're looking for new games and things they could do with their families. But those were a couple of them. I said, Mark, you had a home run. You had 2 home runs here. Two of the businesses that he's involved in happen to be product or services that are growing. So keep in mind there are businesses out there that are growing, and I like to say, somebody's going to make a lot of money when we get through all of this. It might as well be me, might as well be you, right? So what's it going to be? We just got to put our creative hats on. This is kind of an interesting slide. 10 of the fastest growing e-commerce product categories, right? You might expect disposable gloves that are up 670%, right? I thought it was really funny and just odd. Why are bread machines right now up? I don't know. Everybody's at home making their own bread. I don't know. And there's industries down on the lower hemisphere here that are declining, as you might expect. But take a look at those. Maybe those are serving industries that we might be able to provide products or services to. Just remember, there's going to be winners and losers. We might as well be on the winners side. Somebody's going to make a lot of money when we get through this. It might as well be you. So all that stands between you and that is just getting the creatives and innovators on your team together, or mentors, advisors in your council together, and talk about how can we provide product or service to these industries that are critical, these fastest growing product categories or opportunities that are now present as a result of the crisis. So with that, we'll just kind of pause a minute or two, check the chat box, see if there's any questions out there, but also just give you a minute to reflect. What's that one area you'd like to explore that could be a game changer for your company? So give that some thought, write your notes down, and we'll be back in about a minute here.
Yeah, feel free to put your response in the Q&A box or the chat box. I'm monitoring both.
All right, are we good to go?
I think we're good.
All right, thank you. All right, so let's dive into the next few. We'll kind of rush through these. They should go pretty quickly, but point number 6 is really get an action plan. Plan the work the plan, right? Hope for the best, plan for the worst. Plan your 90, 180 priorities, right? Really what I'm learning too is, plan your week priorities and your 30-day priorities. So we got to really dial that in closer. And that's what that bullet point is really talking about. Normally I'm talking to teams and companies about, what are your annual goals? What are your 3 and 5 year goals? Well, in this time, we got to dial that in. It's really tough for us to think what it might be like 180 days out or 90 days out, but we got to start looking at, what are our weekly priorities, having great clarity around that. Where do we want to be in 30 days, right? 30 days from now is like 3 years for most of us. List the things that can be undertaken while remote, marketing, strategic planning, training, orientation, core values, communications. Those are all things that can be done. Just be careful about doing, red work, blue work. Right? Red work is revenue generating activities. Blue work is the work that we do that makes red work possible, right? It's really easy for us to slide into this blue work and fill up our days with a lot of blue work, but we got to remember that we got to do revenue generating activities as well. We can't do blue work because we just don't want to do the red work. So just kind of an interesting perspective. Point 7 in our game plan is communicate, 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 right? It is impossible during these times to over communicate, right? So we just got to be out there sharing, informing, updating employees. Remember what they're not up on, they tend to be down on. We got to educate, communicate on what the tools that we're going to use remotely. We got to establish a meeting rhythm. This is really an important point for everybody on the call is that right now we need to have more meetings that are shorter in duration and more frequent, right? So if you were huddling once a day, best practice right now is companies are huddling 2 or 3 times a day. If you were huddling for 10 minutes, 12 minutes for your daily huddle, maybe now your huddle is only 5 to 7 minutes. And the purpose is to make sure everybody understand what the priority is right now, what the metric is, and to make sure if anybody is stuck or they need anything that they've got a lifeline to get some help, right? So establish your meeting rhythm for your huddles and your weekly problem solving. Establish a communication rhythm with your suppliers, right? Make sure that they're still alive and well and continue to provide product or service, whatever you need. Make sure that you communicate regularly with your clients so that they understand you're still in business and providing and helping if they're stuck anywhere. Partners and banks, as we've talked about, just making sure all the shareholders in your ecosystem are regularly communicated. Lead. It's not a time for consensus now. We need leaders that gather feedback and they make a decision, right? And just make a decision confidently and communicate what that is. You may be right, you may be wrong, but you just can't afford during these times for people to have lack of clarity and waiting on decisions and that sort of thing. In times of chaos, people need structure, they need leadership. The point I make here, I think, the leader gets to decide who gets paid and when, right? And the leader gets to decide, decide how we use our most precious resources. So just keep that in mind as we kind of go through that. Number 9, as we kind of wrap up, put your mask on first. Kevin Lawrence is absolutely one of my favorite subject matter experts in the space. He's a dear friend and has done some great work all over the world. And if you ever get a chance to hear him speak or present, he's a very entertaining, fun, fast-paced presenter. But his research has led him literally all over the planet, talking to CEOs, owners, thousands of them, and I'm not exaggerating in that that's just the truth. But anyway, he's found that so many of the leaders maybe look like they've got it all together on the outside, but on the inside they're just like all the rest of us, and they're struggling with things, right? And it's important for the leader, the owner, to make sure that they're at fighting weight, right? And they have to make sure that they've got good balance, good focus. They're resilient. Oh my gosh, right now we've all got to be resilient. And in his book, he talks about 17 habits for maintaining resilience. I'd encourage each of you on the call right? Just to do that checkup, right? From the neck up and from the neck down. Are you at fighting weight as we go through this, so that you're at your very best for your employees, your very best for your clients, at your very best for your business and the community, because we need good, strong leaders that are in touch there. So you can, he's got many free resources. You can check out his website, or you can email me after today's webinar and I can send you the 17-point checklist. You can kind of do a self-evaluation on putting your oxygen mask first. But remember, just like they say in the airlines, right? You got to put your mask on first, because if you're not able to, right, you're not any good to the guy to the left or to the right. And I think that's so true right now in the crisis that we're amidst. Number 10, user coach. And this isn't a shameless plug for me as an executive coach. It's all about having somebody that you can lean on, right? Somebody that can bounce business decisions, somebody that can bring truth and data, somebody that can help you make sure that you're making good, solid decisions based on data and logic, not on purely emotion, right? Somebody that can validate your thoughts and what do you think about this approach or this solution? What are some other ideas, right? Somebody, importantly, that can hold you accountable. Did you do what you said you were going to do? Well, what happened? Where'd you get stuck? What'd you learn? Where are we going to go from here? What's the revised plan? The truth is you're going to increase your odds of survival, success, and growth if you have a coach, if you have a mentor, if you have a counselor. So if you don't have one, you should get one. Not just because it's a good time in crisis, but it's a good time to have one as you build your business, scale your business, and take your business where you want it to be. So there you have it. There's our 10-point plan. I have, put together in a one-page game plan that kind of captures or summarizes the war on COVID. If you email me or get in touch with me, I'm happy to share this as a resource, but 10-point game plan on making it through these times. Just kind of wrapping up, just reflect. You might want to think, how has this crisis made me better? How can I use this to help others? This is particularly for me personally, and being absolutely transparent. I'm a business owner, just like the rest of you on the call. And about a week and a half, 2 weeks ago, I was going through the different stages of the comfort zone, right? And then I realized that, this is what I've trained my whole life for, at least the last 14 and a half years as a coach, is to be able to help other people. So it really made a huge pivot for me to say, there's people that have problems right now. They're in the middle of a crisis and they need help. And for me now, it's just purely about how can I be useful to others? How can I add value, right? So to some extent, I was telling a good friend the other day ago, I feel like a fat kid in a pie factory, right? Because everywhere I go, everybody's got problems and I can help and I'm loving it. So if you have a problem that needs to be solved, or there's something in your business you'd like to talk about, please reach out to me. It's just a time for us just to help one another. I'd be honored and excited just to be able to help. There's a couple of ways you can catch me, and we'll talk about that, but you can go to my website. You can text Meet Coach to 31996, and you can have access to my calendar. But right now, I'm just trying to help as many people as I can so that we can all get through this together. So just some questions. I love the quote, when darkness is at its darkest, a star shines the brightest. I just want to be remembered during this time as a star that shone brightly. In my own way, I'm not everything to everybody, but I know what I can do, and I can solve problems and help people, and that's what I want to do, and that's what I would encourage everybody on the call to. How can your business, how can you and your leadership team, how can your employees really shine bright during this dark time? And we'll get through this together. So just kind of wrapping up, remember to put your mask on first. Take care of yourself. Be it fighting weight when we get through. Stay connected with your customers, your employees, your clients, your bankers. Be of service. Find opportunities to serve and help and add value. Treat your prospects as clients. This was great advice from my mentor. Every prospect that you have, just treat them as a client right now, right? And when we get through this, right, you may find that those prospects are eager to become clients. Be present. Increase your presence, activity on social media. Let people know who you are, how you can help, and be there. Just a couple of key points that I just want to reinforce as we wrap up. Ask you, what's one thing that would have the greatest positive impact on your future success? Just a great thought bubble for all of us right now as our time runs out. But what's that one thing that if you could take from your hour and a half today and say, take away, there's some idea or some concept or some action that you can take, it would have the greatest positive impact on your survival and ability to succeed going forward. Think about it, write it down, and then act on it. So as I mentioned, a couple ways to get a hold of me. Meet Coach to 31996. If you just text that, it'll give you access to my calendar. Be honored to offer a complimentary coaching session, and we'll just work through whatever business issue or problem that you and your business are facing. As I mentioned, it's really just an act of we're all in this together, and how can I help? And I'd love to be able to help and serve in that way. So with that, just kind of open it up for questions. Got a couple of minutes for just any questions or comments or thoughts that you might have. Mark?
Yeah. One thing that appeared in the chat box is to share your email if you wanted to email again, or if you wanted people to email you, but you already put your
Let me pull that up. Let's see.
Sure.
Yeah, here it is. Patrick.s.frazier@comcast.net will get to me.
All right, awesome. If anyone else has a question, you can throw it in either the chat box or the Q&A. We've had a few people request copies of your one page, so we'll make sure that everyone gets that.
Yep. I want to thank you again for just being present in the webinar and just the opportunity to share. I don't position myself as an expert, but I do want to position myself as somebody that's here to serve and be honored to help where I can. And please reach out to me if I can be of service or assistance in any way. So thank you very much, Pat Frazier from the Coaching Authority.
Thank you, Patrick. It was an excellent presentation, valuable information. Please reach out to Patrick and utilize him, get to know him. And thank you all for attending. Greater Lafayette Commerce has transitioned much of its content to webinar style. So the next Business Strategies series webinar is April 28th. Make sure you go on and register for that. I put a link to our COVID-19 resources that also has a little tab in there that talks about the different upcoming webinars that we have. So be sure to look through that calendar and get registered. If you have any kind of question, you can contact me, Mark Lowe, at mlowe@greaterlafayettecommerce.com. So again, I want to thank our sponsors, thank Patrick, and thank all of you. You have a great day.
Thank you.